more recently, we have seen how the US has tried to play the Khalistan card and the human rights card against the world's largest democracy.
Difficult time is coming. Trump, when he wants to say something, he says it rather harshly and directly. It's, I think, easier to deal with.
First up is a very, very crucial, very urgent conversation which actually impacts the entire world, and that is the election of a very polarizing, very divisive, and very decisive political figure, Donald Trump. He's resisted. None of us really need to go over the sheer surprise, and perhaps not the surprise, but the shock factor of having somebody who's been impeached twice come back into power with the kind of decisive vote that he's had, and with the kind of completely, game-changing ideas that he's been espousing, both for America, for the world order, relations with allies, in terms of culture wars, all of that. So what does the rise of this man really mean for all of us, for America itself, and for some of the foundational ideas that have been taken for granted in a modern world, which really is about democracy and freedom and rights of women, rights of sort of all societies. And yet, I just want to do a quick pen portrait of this man with two very tiny figures. One is that out of the 44 people that comprised his, to use the Indian word, cabinet, half of those have said that he is unfit to rule. They've used words like unhinged. And these are people like his national security advisor, his former defense secretary, attorney generals, his secretaries of state, chiefs of staff, people who have worked very closely with him, have not endorsed him, have not wanted to come back, his own vice president. And yet, at the other end, he's had a 55% vote from women. He's had a huge vote from Latinos, from blacks, people that one would have imagined were not his natural constituency. So definitely, it's a lightning rod political event. And as I said, it's going to have ripple effects across the world. To decode that, to decode the theater of Trump, we have a fantastic panel today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Mr. PS Raghavan. He is the chairman of the National Security Advisory Council. He's been our ambassador to Russia and is a very veteran political commentator, so very happy to have him on stage. Please also welcome Mr. Yoon Young-kwan, who is the former foreign minister of Korea. He's also been the minister of trade. He is now at the Asan Institute, one of the most prestigious think tanks in South Korea, super germane as the theaters of attention and war shift to the Indo-Pacific. And of course, Mr. Brahma Chellaney, all of you read him, know him. Again, a China expert, a political commentator, author of many books. And we are very, very excited to have all three of them on stage. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let me start with, on a lighter note, before we get into the deep and grave topics that we have to, which is that, let me start with you, Mr. Raghavan, since you head the National Security Advisory Council, that if you were writing a secret memo about the re-election of Mr. Trump, what would that memo say?
Whom would I write it to? That's the first question.
Okay. Suppose you were writing it to Mr. Modi.
I would say that 3 weeks ago, I had already predicted the victory.
That's too self-aggrandizing. What's the assessment?
No. I think we know very well what to expect from Mr. Trump. There has been
you must be one of the minority saying that, actually.
No. I will say that when he came first time, he caused a lot of commotion everywhere because he shook established views and established practices. But now, first, the second Trump administration, in my view, is going to be nothing like the first Trump administration because he is much better organized. He will probably get personnel whom he wanted to get. The first time around, you said that his Secretary of State and his Chief of Staff and so on and so forth, all of them are not endorsing him because all of them disagreed with him.
All of them?
Disagreed with him. And in fact, as people said, they were the adults in the room who were trying to make this child do what they wanted them to do, and Trump simplified them. So these memoirs are self-serving memoirs, you know. Trump didn't listen to them, and therefore he's unfit.
Okay, I'm going to come back to ask you about that. Mr. Yoon, let me, if you were now doing a diplomatic, something that, Julian Assange would want to reveal, what would that memo have said about the rise of Trump? How do you assess it?
Probably the first line would be read like this: we have taken a step closer to the brave new world.
Right.
What I mean is President Trump will pursue his goal of reducing the role of the U.S. In maintaining liberal international order or a rules-based international order. I think he will do that this time with his energy and with his experience or something like that. And that will lead to the weakening influence of the United States in international politics, and probably the rise of influence of the axis of authoritarian revisionist powers.
The rise of the?
Rise of the axis of axis of authoritarian. The countries, revisionist countries like Russia, China, Iran, or North Korea, or something like that. And the rules-based international order will be very much weakened, and probably we may have to face a situation that very difficult situation where might makes right. So I'm somewhat pessimistic. I'm sorry I may be too pessimistic, but basically we are entering a new world, and I hope that new world would not that much, terrible and mild probably. So kind of difficult time is coming. And this is because the United States, U.S. President Trump 2.0 declared that he would go back to the long tradition of U.S. isolationism. Actually, President George Washington, in the first U.S. president, declared that the United States should not make any alliance with outside world. So we are returning. They are returning to that kind of America. Yeah.
So I'm just going to come back to you to open that up a little bit, but I'm glad that the pessimistic heart of this discussion sits at the center, but because I think both the others are quite optimistic about him. But I'll come back to what you said about the isolationism, because at the same time, the National Security Advisor that Mr. Trump has anointed, Michael Waltz, and the Secretary of State that Mike Rubio, are both actually very hawkish about China, and they want to shift the theater of attention away from the Middle East and Europe to the Indo-Pacific, to Taiwan, to Korea, to this entire region. So I'm not sure how isolationist they're going to be, just a new chapter in their interventions in the world. So I'm going to come back to you to discuss that. Brahma, what about you? You're not writing a secret memo to anyone, but what is your, just the first elevator pitch on Trump 2.0?
It's good news for India simply because the US-India relationship is going through a rough patch under Biden. In the last 2 years, as Biden's cognitive decline became more apparent, the relationship with India came under increasing strain. The US under Biden tried to first bully India on the Ukraine issue by seeking to pressure India to give up its neutrality on the Ukraine war. And more recently, we have seen how the US has tried to play the Khalistan card and the human rights card against the world's largest democracy. So for India, this kind of change in Washington opens up a new opportunity to restore the momentum in the US-India relationship. And I think it's also good news for the US because under Biden, America's relative decline in the world became more and more apparent because the US set out to weaken Russia through a proxy war in Ukraine, but it ended up also sapping its own strength because its resources were being consumed by the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. And I personally would like the US to remain globally preeminent. And I was very worried under Biden as to how the US was sapping its own strength. They failed to weaken Russia. Russia today is a resurgent power, and the West is far from being able to defeat Russia in Ukraine. Russia is still in control of 1/5 of Ukraine, and therefore the choices for the US are pretty stark today. And I'm glad that there'll be a new government on January 20th that will seek to revitalize the US economically and militarily.
So, again, that's something when you said revitalize America economically, there's a lot of excitement that because of his aggression on China, that India will become the default place where others will come to. And so it's a good moment for India. But there's also a lot of sober commentary on how there's going to be a kind of reverse economic impacts, not just for America, but for the entire world, because of the tariff regime that he wants to create, inflationary pressures, even the immigration that he wants to deport so many million people. People have done really detailed analysis of how the hospitality sector in America, the agriculture sector, all of that is running actually on the people that he wants to deport. So that there's going to be a very mixed economic response to the policies that he wants to do. So I'm going to, again, like I said, I just wanted to have one quick open introductory round, just to set the whole canvas of what we want to look at. It's very broad, but we want to look at this impacts in Russia and Europe, in the Middle East or West Asia, and then for China and for India, so that's the kind of ground we want to cover. So in that, I want to come to you. He said that overnight, he's going to end the war in literally 24 hours, Mr. Raghavan. Do you think that that's possible? He's already spelled out the sort of boundaries of that. Do you think that that's going to be acceptable? And where does Europe stand now in relation to this?
First to comment on this, why is Trump doing what he is doing? It follows from what he said about the impact of Biden's policies. Trump realizes that America is today an overstretched superpower, and therefore it has to husband its resources better. And that is why it's absolutely essential that he ends the war in Ukraine, because otherwise they're getting sucked into it more and more. He has to find a solution in West Asia so that he can focus on number one strategic adversary, China. Now, what are they trying to do? 24 hours is, I think, a bit of an exaggeration. That's campaign rhetoric. But you've already seen, actually you've not seen the outlines of what Trump wants to do, because you only have some various leaks from various sources. But you know that he has talked to Zelensky. Very significantly, he talked to Zelensky along with Elon Musk. There is a political significance to that, because Elon Musk owns the Starlink satellite constellation, which is Zelensky's, or rather Ukraine's, lifeline. It can't fight the war without Starlink, because the terrestrial communication system in Ukraine is gone. So this was Trump not so subtly telling Zelensky that, look, I mean, this has to come to an end, Otherwise, we have other means of putting it to an end. Now, the Washington Post reported that he had already talked to Putin. Putin's people deny it. I suspect he has not talked to him. I suspect he would have sent a messenger. But the idea is clear. And this is being talked about by others as well. And by the way, even if Harris had come to office, you would have done something similar to that. You have to now freeze the line of contact, have a demilitarized zone, have some kind of an agreement about how Ukraine's security will be secured. But most importantly, and this has not been talked about, if you have to get Putin to agree to, after all, he's now sitting on 20% of Ukraine's land. If you have to get him to agree to some kind of a deal, you have to go back to something that US and Russia have been talking about for a long time, which is creating what you might call a cordon sanitaire between Russia and NATO. You know, like it's something like the, it's a bad analogy today, but it's something like the peace and tranquility, agreement on peace and tranquility that we had with China, the intention of it. You create a buffer zone, and in that buffer zone, it will be, at least the heavy weaponry will not be there, and there will be early warning of, so this is a kind of mutual security which Europe will welcome, because Europe actually liked this security which existed during the Cold War.
Sure, but Mr. Raghavan, you know, both you and Brahma seem quite optimistic that he's going to be coherent, that, you know, he's going to stop the wars, and that's much needed. There's a new world order. But at the same time, what I can see is that actually it's only a shifting of the aggressive rhetoric. You know, before this, Russia was the axis of evil. You had to curtail Russia, and so you create a war there. Iran is the axis of evil, so you have a war there. What they basically want to do is just wrap up all the mess that's been created in all these theaters of war and bring the war to our neighborhood, you know, which is now Indo-Pacific is the new theater of war. China is the big adversary, and Taiwan is going to be the bone that everybody is fighting over. And quite worryingly, they're saying, let's treat India as our allies. And you remember the famous thing that Henry Kissinger said, that, you know, what's worse than America's, to be America's enemy is to be America's friend, you know. So I'm not sure whether this really is a wrapping up of all wars or the start of new ones.
See, you're dramatizing things a bit too much.
Yeah.
You have to move
just to pierce the sobriety with which you're
from
talking.
drama to real life politics.
Right.
And you have to follow also what Trump has been saying. Not the kind of thing that you showed on the screen, which is all the ridiculous things that he says and the sound bites. But if you follow what he has actually said and written, it's not that incoherent. It's actually pretty coherent. And you see the conservative agenda, it is laid out in Project 2025. It's a remarkably cogent document. You may or may not agree with it. But it has all these thoughts. It has the thought that in today's world, if America has to retain its influence in the world, it has to outsource some of the things that it is doing itself. So it says, for example, you know, NATO should be largely European
And pay for itself.
deterrent against Russia, and US will provide nuclear umbrella. Similarly, he says in the Middle East, countries should have their own coastal and missile defense, with America providing the oversight. And similarly, he talks, even in East Asia, he talks about Japan and Taiwan and its allies providing the first line of security. But the point about will Trump, you know, everybody says he's a character whom you can't predict and so on. I will give you one clue about how I think he will go. Since the time of his election results and today, how many tweets from Trump have you seen? Very few.
He must be very exhausted also.
Anyway, he doesn't do tweets these days, he does Truth Social. So these are all called truths and not tweets. But also when he does so in long sentences, no caps. Caps was his signature in tweet. So you see, you find a sobering manifestation, even in the way Trump has behaved after the election.
Right. So let me pull you in. Do you share his optimism, and or do you agree with mine that the heat is really going to shift to this part of the world? I mean, for instance, Mr. Biden had, you know, and this is not that I hold any candle for him, I was just asking that he had cemented that the American forces in South Korea would continue, would be amplified, and that no one should really be able to dismantle that. But Mr. Trump has been saying that where earlier Korea was paying $1 billion for the maintenance of these troops, that he now expects Korea to pay $10 billion for the maintenance of these troops, and that everybody should really pay for American protection. And that also, he's quite happy to speak with North Korea. He could possibly shift the pivot of attention from North Korea to Taiwan.
He hasn't said that during this campaign. He has not said that during this campaign that he will talk to North Korea, isn't it? I don't think he has said it.
Let's hear.
I'm a little bit concerned about the future of ROK-US relations because President Donald Trump has been very skeptical about the value of alliance. And he tended to regard those allies as countries which try to extract some benefits under the name of ally or alliance partner or something like that. And that will apply to U.S.-South Korea relationship, and that there may be some kind of uncertainty, increasing uncertainty in the nature of alliance. And he will be very transactional in dealing with this alliance issue with South Korea. So probably it is almost certain that he would demand to raise our burden sharing, defense burden sharing, as you already mentioned, from $1 billion to $10 billion, or we do not know how the negotiation will go. But I think South Koreans will have to be ready to pay more, certainly, and ask them to maintain status quo in terms of U.S. troops stationing in South Korea. And I think that's also South Korean people should try to get something like, the right to reprocess spent fuel rod, plutonium rod, and we don't have, while Japan has it. Because we need to have that kind of capability. We don't want to arm ourselves with nuclear weapons, but we had better strengthen our capability in case something happens on the Korean Peninsula.
So you're saying that there's a thought process now that South Korea should, you don't want to, but you should possibly look at arming yourselves with nuclear capabilities.
Since 2019, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been trying very hard to strengthen their nuclear power, and he reversed to the hostile policy toward South Korea and the United States. He would never come to the negotiation table for the in the past. So I think South Koreans have become very, kind of scared of the increasing threat coming from North Korea, and almost 70% of Korean population supported the idea of developing nuclear weapons.
Right.
But in reality, political reality, as long as U.S. government strongly maintains its commitment to defend South Korea through extended deterrence, there would be no need to develop nuclear weapons for ourselves. But if Trump 2.0, the second Trump administration weakens that kind of commitment, we have to put every option on the table and think twice about what to do in terms of defending South Korea. So
Right.
that's a very serious issue for South Koreans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to quickly ask you to broaden that. And do you agree with Mr. Raghavan's assessments for not South Korea, but for the rest of the world, that Mr. Trump is a new, energetic, interesting shake-up of the world order that Biden was creating?
I've expanded my words.
Right. Do- do-
Yeah, it's okay.
I know you broadly think that because we've chatted earlier.
Let me answer to that question in this way. I mean, the reason why I tended to be somewhat pessimistic is that President Donald Trump didn't seem to pay much attention about rules-based international order or value factor in diplomacy, etc., etc. South Koreans suffered a lot when there was no rules in international relations. That country was erased on the map when, there was no rule in the early 20th century. Japanese colonized South Korea. And returning to that kind of world is a kind of, nightmare scenario for South Koreans. So we, naturally support U.S. Biden administration's decision to sanction Russia and to support Ukraine. And if Ukraine war, in the Ukraine war, if Ukraine war ends in the way that President Putin can declare victory, that would significantly, risky from Korean perspective, because that kind of declaration of victory by President Trump would send a very negative message to those leaders like Kim Jong-un or Xi Jinping. So everything is linked to each other. What's going on in Ukraine will be affecting South Korean security situation and China situation. So I'm concerned about that kind of trend.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'd just like to draw Brahma into it. One pushback I'd like to give on that, though, is that, this elections has shown also that people are very tired with the kind of hypocrisy of this rules-based order as well, because while Biden was, speaking about America's defense of democracy and the rules-based order in Ukraine, they were also completely supporting Israel's complete evisceration of Palestine and doing nothing about it, really, So I think the domestic
I
audience in
understand, yes.
in America is
Yeah.
quite fed up of their...
Sometimes people say that the U.S. has been adopting a kind of double standard. I agree. But at least I think the United States didn't try to occupy Iraqi territory, and they didn't try to declare that's U.S. territory or something like that. So there's a kind of difference in quality between Putin's behavior and American behavior. I think there's a different qualitative difference.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
If I could, just comment, you're mentioning examples from elsewhere. What about the rules-based order application in our own neighborhood as far as the U.S. is concerned? Look at what they did in Bangladesh. They played a role, directly or indirectly, in bringing about regime change in Bangladesh, right? Today, Bangladesh is effectively under a military mullah rule with major implications for India's security. There are three neighbors of India where the Americans are pursuing completely different policies. They are propping up military-backed regimes in Pakistan and Bangladesh today, while trying to overthrow the military regime in Myanmar, including by arming rebels in Myanmar with some of the arms that they are supplying to the Myanmar rebels flowing into India's Manipur state. So you can see how under Biden, there wasn't really any morality in American foreign policy, let alone any adherence to a rules-based order. They were aggressively advancing their narrowly defined interests. Instead of working with India, which is a major partner of the US, India, in fact, is critical to advancing America's interests in the Indo-Pacific region. So instead of working with India in India's own immediate neighborhood, They were working against India's interests in India's own neighborhood. So, for somebody who's sitting in New Delhi and looking at the global scene, we should not forget that these rules are mentioned only by those when it's convenient to them. But, for example, in which country can you expect somebody to make terrorist threats against a friendly country with impunity? But we've had this guy called Pannoon making threats against Air India, against New Delhi Airport, against specific targets in India, while being based in New York City. Is this acceptable to anybody? So, they are playing different cards. They're playing under Biden, they were playing the Khalistan card against India. And in fact, they set Trudeau against India by sharing sketchy intelligence with Ottawa. That's how Trudeau got up in Parliament and made his allegation against India in September last year. And recently he admitted in public, while testifying before a federal inquiry in Parliament, that when he made that allegation against India, which triggered this downward spiral in Canada-India relations, he was relying on raw intelligence, not on hard evidence. So we have to look at the bigger picture and not be carried away by nice-sounding terms like rules-based order.
No,
There isn't a rules-based order.
I was in fact just going to say that yes, on American foreign policy, there's never really been a rules-based order. They've always done what suits them, so which is why I'm wondering at the kind of optimism that both of you are feeling. I wanted Brahma to say one more thing, because on China, both of you actually articulate a different thing, which is, Mr. Raghavan, you're very pro-India, just having this very multi-approach to relationships, which are, like you said, JVs, with countries that work for us. And in fact, the foreign establishment in India is talking about having a conversation with China, maybe diluting this kind of adversarial position that we have. There's talk of the rise of Asia if China and India come together. But Brahma, you on the other hand are very aggressive about the fact that China needs to be contained, seen as an adversary. Definitely it's like a new theater of war. So, there's a big division in the Indian foreign establishment about how to really see China. What would your take on that be?
I don't think there's a division. He will tell you that, and after that, I will also speak on it.
Yeah, there's no such division in Indian foreign policy establishment or thinking at all. The thing is that when history is written, what will be Biden's legacy? The most important legacy, the most damaging legacy of Biden would be that he brought China and Russia closer together. He created a Sino-Russian axis against America, which is very detrimental to America's long-term interests. We have to remember that America won the Cold War, not militarily, but geopolitically. After Richard Nixon created this opening to China, the US co-opted China in an informal alliance to contain and roll back Soviet power and influence, creating a 2-against-1 competition. The 2-against-1 competition ultimately created Soviet imperial overreach, and it led to the Soviet Union's disintegration, leaving the West triumphant in the Cold War. Today, the 2-against-1 competition is back, but with the US at the receiving end. So this is America's geopolitical nightmare coming true. And because of Biden's conciliatory approach toward China, because he's fighting this proxy war against Russia, he had to have a better, more conciliatory approach towards China. He couldn't afford to take on both together. India got worried, and India in turn sought a thaw in relations with Beijing. So in effect, Biden compounded his blunder in bringing Russia and China closer together by also impelling India to seek a thaw in relations with China. So this was a double mistake. This is a mistake that only Trump can correct, because there's a very famous Indian children's tale, a Panchtantra tale. It's about two cats and a monkey. Two cats were fighting over a cake. and a monkey came quietly and ate up the whole cake. The moral of the story that children are taught in school is that when two parties fight, a third party emerges as the winner. And in the Ukraine war, the two cats are obvious. On one side is the West, other side is Russia. And the winner, as you can all guess, is China. China is emerging the clear winner from the Ukraine war. The last thing Xi Jinping wants is an end to the Ukraine war. He has become Russia's banker. Now Russia earns most of its export revenues in the Chinese yuan. Where does it keep those revenues? In Chinese banks, in effect giving China a share of its return, or a share of the proceeds. So today, if you want the US to refocus its attention on revitalizing its security, its economic strength, it has to disengage from a war which is leading it nowhere.
Sure, but I know that you're going to say that I'm just kind of conflating things, but Mr. Raghavan, you are okay with Russia, laying its claim. You said that the context, it always depends on what's the context and where do you stop the context. There's a longer context, a shorter context, and that Russia had some legitimate claims in that neighborhood.
Again, you're putting words in my mouth, but anyway, carry on.
I'm summarizing things you've said in the past, that it had legitimate concerns in that region. But like Mr. Yoon was saying, that if indeed now there's a ceasefire and whatever territory Russia has taken, that ends up being the line of control. In some ways, China is making these greater China claims, over Arunachal Pradesh, over this entire region. And so if one talks in this way, that everybody has their selfish interests and which are legitimate, which are real politics, do you think that that's just opening up the legitimacy of even China saying that in Indian context?
See, this has often been said, but it is said in academia, it is said in the media. If you've ever been in a policy-making situation, and Jaishankar, our foreign minister, Dr. Jaishankar has said this, that look, if I make a decision on what I want to do in my neighborhood, I do it after assessing what are the possibilities here. I do not go and say I'm going to attack this country because Russia went and attacked Ukraine and got away with it. There's no comparison actually. So this business of, if that happens, this will happen here, is not a valid comparison. A policymaker doesn't look at it that way. Now, again, if you're talking about Russia, what were Russia's, you see, countries have their own perception of their national interest and their own great power. Russia still thinks it's a great power. It's not a superpower, but it's still a resurgent, as you said. So it has taken its decision on the basis of that. And once again, as I said in our last conversation, history did not begin on 24th of February 2022. It began at least in 2008, and in fact even further back in 1991. And so you can keep justifying a country's ambitions, you can keep objecting to it. All big countries break the law, all big countries have excuses for it. So I'm not getting into that particular aspect of it.
So if you just focus on India, and then I'll just come momentarily to West Asia and America before we start wrapping this up. For India, just prioritize what are the 5 things that you think are really going to be good for India because Trump has come to power.
No, look, I think it's not all going to be hunky-dory. I think you will face a lot of issues with Trump as well. To start with, even immigration. If he's going to deport illegal immigrants, there are a lot of them from India there. In fact, according to the some figures I saw, in the last year alone, some 90,000 Indian illegal immigrants from India have gone into the US. Now, if he's going to put a broom across, I think we'll end up receiving quite a few and wondering what to do with them. So, and how to phase it in such a way that it doesn't cause us political problems. So, that's not going to be easy. Trade, for example. He says that I want fair, balanced trade. And he says it to everybody. It's not just China, it is India, it is EU. EU has suffered, and every country has suffered. We are going to have to suffer it. They withdrew the GSP, Generalized System of Preferences, from us the last time Trump was in office. They called us a currency manipulator. All of that will happen. And we do have to adjust our trade policies. and defend ourselves to the extent that we can. That's not going to be easy either. Trump says America first, moving industry into America.
Which will clash with Make in India.
Now, so we have a technology partnership, we have a defense technology partnership. It will be an uphill battle to see how much we can get. Of course, we can also leverage the fact that we are the world's largest arms importer and use that to... So it's not all going to be hunky-dory. The point I'm making is actually the point that he made, that, you know, you are now dealing with an administration that has a forked tongue. On the same day that our Prime Minister lands in Washington, the National Security Council, that is the White House, invites Khalistani groups to the White House and says, you know, we will protect you against transnational aggression. And then Biden, of course, hugs PM and says, we countries share democratic ideals and so on. See, this kind of two-facedness, if we don't have... Trump, when he wants to say something, he says it rather harshly and directly. It's I think, easier to deal with.
Okay. I was just going to, come to... You've been kind of focusing on the South Korea situation, but do you think that his positions on trade, on tariffs, on, moving industry back to America, how will that impact the whole world? And also the focus that there is now on, also taking back technology, the fact that, that one company takes care of almost 95% of chips that the whole, new revolution, AI revolution is really based on. In all those ways, do you think that Trump's attention is really going to be very focused on Taiwan? And how will his whole economic approach of his administration pan out?
Yes, that's very, important question. And before I answer to that question, if you don't mind, I'd like to express my view about Trump's way of dealing China and Biden's way of dealing China. With due respect to Mr. Chellaney's view, I want to be a little kinder to President Biden. What I'm saying is he was very systematic and organized in confronting China compared to Trump's way of confronting China. In the first term, Trump's first term, he didn't like allies that much, so he couldn't mobilize those allies in confronting China. He couldn't form a kind of coalition of willings or something like that. But President Biden basically emphasized the importance of alliance, and he tried to take advantage of U.S. relations with the 60-some allies in the world, and he organized small gatherings and minilateral organizations like AUKUS, QUAD, or U.S. ROK, Japan Trilateral Cooperation Mechanism, or something like that. So that kind of coalition, I think, helped a lot when President Biden wanted to pressure China more effectively in some sense. I'm afraid President Trump, his second term, will mainly focus on economic issues, trade issues, and trade deficit issues or something like that when they deal with China. Some other concerns about security matters or strategic issues, President Trump doesn't seem to have much interest in that area. So probably, the way of dealing with China may be similar to his previous way of dealing China in the first term. So I don't know how much or how effective his way of dealing China would be in coming years. It remains to be seen. But regarding the Trump's economic policy of pressuring not only some allies, but also all the other the countries which have trade surplus with the United States. I think that I don't know whether, we are entering into a kind of 1930s 30s situation. Bigger thy neighbor policies, will begin to, spread among, all the countries, and that will lower the standard of living for every country, including the United States. So everybody will lose in that kind of situation.
Right. I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to intrude because I just suddenly saw the time and we are running out of time. So just one quick last question, Brahma, and I'm going to ask 2, 3 into one capsule, which is that, in West Asia, he's really quite happy to just forget about Palestine and just freeze that situation. He's put somebody in place in Israel who actually supports settlements, and they don't believe in a two-state solution. So, they're quite happy to go ahead with the Abraham Accords and just forget Palestine ever existed. So, and, even domestically, there's this anxiety about, like you said, deportations, mass scale, and yet he seems to have captured the imagination. So, in the final analysis, because we've run out of time, do you think that this completely transactional approach to foreign policy based on who he likes, what is America's particular selfish interest, very transparently done, but will that ultimately create a better world order or a more sort of explosive world order?
Well, if Trump is transactional, is Biden not transactional in his foreign policy approach towards other countries? As far as the Middle East is concerned, look at Biden policy. He's been providing weapons and massive aid to Israel, even as Israel is waging wars in Gaza and in southern Lebanon, causing widespread devastation. Now, Trump comes in. He will support Israel strongly, as he did in the first term. But in his first term, remember, he also pushed Israel to accept a Palestinian state. So when you have a strong man in office, you might achieve more for American interests than what a weak Biden failed to achieve. So it's not going to be a blank check for Israel, as some seem to believe. As far as India is concerned, we should not forget that what Trump seeks to do is what India is doing or should be doing. For example, mass deportation, or he's now trying to institute a Make in America policy, parallel to India's Make in India policy. Mass deportations, according to US estimates, official estimates, there are about 12 to 13 illegal, 12 to 13 million illegal migrants in the US. How many illegal Bangladeshis there are in India? How many? According to the last figure from the Home Ministry, when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, it was about 15 to 16 million, according to the Home Ministry's estimate, far more than the illegal migrants in the US. But in India, we are pretty happy to accommodate all the illegals, right? So we shouldn't take objection to what Trump's agenda is. This is his rhetoric. Whether he'll succeed in deporting even 500,000 is open to question, because it'll cost billions of dollars to deport even 1 million illegal migrants from the US. Rhetoric and actual action, there will be a gap. But I think what he is doing, he is seeking to reverse the deindustrialization of the US by bringing jobs back to the US. That, from an American perspective, is not bad policy. It's good policy. And certainly seeking to revitalize both the economy and America's national security is, again, something that every American president should be doing. And I think that political change in general is always good, because when you have a new government and a new team in place, there's new energy and new focus. And I think we can expect change. Some change is not going to be to India's liking, some change, some actions and policies of Trump will clash with India's interests. But will India-US relationship thrive as they did in Trump's first term? I'm pretty optimistic that they would, because we should not forget that in his first term, he did two things that fundamentally changed US-India dynamics, which was he instituted a paradigm shift in America's China policy by ending the 45-year policy from Richard Nixon to Barack Obama of aiding China's economic rise. He began defining China as an adversary. That policy continues under Biden. The tariffs he imposed on China continue under Biden, and he also cut off security assistance to Pakistan for Pakistan's refusal to sever its links with terrorist groups. That policy has been reversed by Biden, which has been coddling Pakistan, and recently they even had a $450 million modernization of Pakistan's F-16 fleet to make it more potent against India.
Right. So we're going to have to end it there because we could carry on endlessly. I would have loved to ask you about his response to his drill, and have a carte blanche on fossil fuels in America at a time when all of us can feel the impacts of climate change and our own emphasis on solar. And they're innumerable, both the goods and the bads that can continue. But it's good to have this complex perspective of
I want to make one comment about this transactional. Everyone keeps on talking about a transactional president. Foreign policy is a summation of transactions. Every interaction is a transaction. So let's not say he's a transactional president. All foreign policy moves are transactional.
Right. On that note, we're going to open this up. I just want to tell you that Sakshi Malik, who was supposed to be here, was pregnant, and she was supposed to deliver her baby in December, but she went into early labor and she's just had a baby. So huge congratulations to her. But she's not able to join us today. She wanted to send a video message, but she's not been able to do that because she was in hospital still. So we're going to open this up for cocktails, and we'll be back. We didn't discuss the rise of Elon Musk along with Trump, but we have a wonderful speaker just after the cocktails who's going to take us into another realm of a wild, wild country, which is the Wall Street and Silicon Valley all on speed. So let's have a quick drink, and we'll be back very shortly. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.